Australian history, and it isn't just twisted and it's manufactured. The stories we're told in school are half-truths stitched together with colonial propaganda. And when you start pulling at the thread, it all unravels. Let's start with the myth of the convict colony. The official line is simple. Britain had too many criminals, the jails were bursting, the hulks on the Thames were overflowing, so they shipped them off to the other side of the world. Neat, tidy, and totally false. Here's what the record actually shows. In the 18th century, crime rates in Britain were not unusually high. In fact, crime statistics were poorly kept, and what was recorded shows nothing like the crime wave we're told about. The real spike wasn't crime, and it was in laws. Between 1688 and 1820, Parliament created what historians call the Bloody Code. Over 200 offenses, from stealing a loaf of bread to poaching a rabbit, became punishable by death. Not because society collapsed, but because the poor refused to play the empire's game. See, Britain had colonies, hundreds of them, from India to Africa to the Americas and finally Australia. But ordinary people didn't want to go, why would they? Life was brutal enough in London slums. Why volunteer to die of disease in the tropics or be worked to death building someone else's fortune? So the Crown created a pipeline. Petty thefts, once punishable with a slap on the wrist, now carried the death sentence. But instead of hanging everyone, judges commuted sentences to transportation, which conveniently supplied the labor and bodies to expand Britain's colonial machine. Australia wasn't a solution to a convict crisis. The convict crisis was engineered to populate Australia. Let's go deeper. Shipping convicts overseas wasn't new. Britain had been doing it since the early 1600s, to Virginia, to Barbados, to the American colonies. When America won independence in 1783, Britain lost its dumping ground. Less than 5 years later, Captain Arthur Phillip was sailing into Botany Bay with the First Fleet. Coincidence? Not a chance. The empire needed new land, and Australia became the replacement. And who benefited? The same people who always do, the investors, the land speculators, the aristocracy. Free labor to cut timber, build roads, mine resources, and establish outposts of empire. Convicts were the excuse, empire was the goal. This is why the history we're fed doesn't add up. They don't teach you about the profits of the East India Company, or how transportation was tied directly to corporate contracts. They don't tell you about the hundreds of thousands of Irish and Scottish people cleared from their lands and labeled as criminals to make way for landlords. They don't tell you how the law was rewritten not to fight crime but to create criminals out of the poor. And if the foundation is a lie, what else is built on it? Australia as a lucky country, Britain as the civilizing empire, law and order as the backbone of society. All stories written to hide the reality. It was about control, profit, and exploitation. Once you see it, you can't unsee it. The convict story isn't a quirky chapter of Australian history, it's a mask. A mask hiding the fact that colonial empires were never built for the people. They were built on their backs. And that's why this matters. Because if the very origin story of Australia is a lie, then the whole way we're taught to see ourselves, our history, and our place in the world needs to be rewritten.